Hello, everyone. My name is Ted Hotaling. I'm the archivist and digital projects librarian here at the Samuel C. Williams Library, and I'm also responsible for checking the formatting of all master's theses and dissertations before their final submission to ProQuest. So today we'll go over all the submission steps, the formatting guidelines, publishing options, and other things to keep in mind along the way. If you have any questions after this, you can email me at thoughta@stevens.edu here in the corner of the slide. Before we get into the details, it's important to know that the deadline for defending, getting the formatting approved, and submitting everything online to the library can be found on the academic calendar, which you can access on the Office of the Registrar's website. The link can be found here, or you can just go to the main directory on My Stevens. And although the library isn't involved in the defense process, we thought it might be helpful to show you who you need to speak to in order to get that set up. You'll go to Graduate Academics Intranet site, the link here in blue, and it'll give you all the information you need about defense announcements and who you need to work with, depending on if you're a master's student or doctoral student. So master's students will coordinate their defense with their department and advisors. And doctoral students will work with graduate academics and student success. And you can contact them at gradacademics@stevens.edu if you haven't already done your defense announcement. But just to clarify, the library only handles the formatting side of things. And what do we mean by formatting? When we look over your paper, we're just checking for basic stuff, like if your title page, copyright page, the abstract page, etc., conforms to the formatting guidelines outlined on our submission website at library.stevens.edu/submit. We also check that the page numbers and page margins are correct, that all images, figures, tables, and text are within the page margins. And finally, at the end of the process, and after you defend, we check that your approved title page has all your committee signatures and that you've also paid the binding fee online, which we'll get into later. So it's all pretty basic stuff. We don't do any content editing. That's up to you and your advisor. And like I said, we aren't involved in the defense process. So any questions related to your defense should either be directed to your advisor or department if you're a master's student, or graduate academics and student success if you're a PhD student. And this is just a quick breakdown of all the major steps in the process. So first, you look at the Graduate Academics Intranet site, which gives you all the info for defense announcements and how to schedule your defense. And then you carefully review the formatting guidelines at library.stevens.edu/submit. After that, you'll upload a PDF of your title page to ETD before you defend, so we can approve the formatting before you get your committee signatures. EDT is just the website we use to handle the submissions. And that's where we'll do the back and forth with the formatting checks before your paper is eventually published to ProQuest after the final submission deadline. So just to reiterate that part, you first upload the title page before you defend. And it can just be the single page PDF. You don't have to have your full paper completed at this point. But if you want to submit an initial draft early on, so I can take a look at the formatting, that's fine too, as long as it contains the title page. So after that initial check of the title page, you'll defend, and then after you incorporate your committee's edits, you'll upload the revised PDF to ETD for a final approval check. At that point, you'll also pay the binding fee for 3 bound copies using the library payment portal. And an important distinction is you're not going to pay the binding fee in ETD. You'll pay it through the library payment portal, as I just said, but we'll get into that later. We'll also get into what you'll submit at the very end after everything is approved in ETD. And again, all of this stuff is covered on our main submission website at library.stevens.edu/submit. And this is what you'll find on the library submission website that I just mentioned. We wanted to make this whole process super easy to follow, so definitely bookmark this page. Graduate students will just click the Master's and PhD students section at the top of the page, and that links to a PDF that gives all the formatting guidelines and a checklist for each step during the whole process. There are also sample pages for the title page, a LaTeX template for dissertations, and Microsoft Word templates for master's students. So hopefully those will come in handy for you. And this is what the PDF info sheet looks like on that website. As you can see, everything you need to know before submitting your paper. So be sure to carefully review everything here before you begin your submission in ETD. And I'll just quickly show you what the title page should look like. And all of these pages are available in the sample pages section on the library submission site. I won't go through each and every section of your paper, but I did just want to show you what the formatting looks like for the main sections. So there's instructions for spacing, page margins, size of the font, etc. We don't really care what particular font you use, but it's best to stick with one font and use that throughout the paper with a consistent font size. Usually 12-point would work, but it's really up for your department as far as that goes. And again, there's also a LaTeX template for dissertations that has all the formatting requirements already in place, as there is with the Microsoft Word template for master's students. And this is what the master's thesis title page looks like. The only difference is that it'll say a thesis in all caps instead of Doctor of Philosophy. And alongside a thesis, you just put your degree designation and your department. The copyright page will follow the title page. And just like the title page, there's no page number in the top right corner. All you have to do at the bottom is just put the copyright symbol, the date, and your name. The abstract section is the third section, and it's the first page that's numbered. And you'll use lowercase Roman numerals for the rest of the front-facing sections of your paper, like for a table of contents, list of figures, etc. And since it's the third page in your paper, you'll use lowercase Roman numeral 3 in the top right corner, and that's where all your page numbers will go throughout your paper. Just make sure to follow the format here with the name of the author, advisor, date, department, and degree at the bottom. There really isn't any hard or fast word count, but usually between 300 and 500 words will suffice. And this part is just for PhD students. Master's students don't have to worry about this. The last section of your paper, if you're a PhD student, will essentially be your resume, called the Vita section. So education, professional accomplishments, etc. So now that you've looked over the formatting guidelines, you're ready to submit to ETD. ETD is just electronic theses and dissertations. It's a website managed by ProQuest, and it's where we keep track of submissions, and it's where I check the formatting, let you know if any edits need to be made. You won't send a draft of your paper to my email or anything like that. As far as you're concerned, this part of the process will take place entirely in ETD. And once you submit your paper for review, we'll go back and forth with formatting edits until everything's approved. And just allow 2 or 3 business days for the library to review your paper. So just keep that in mind as the deadline approaches. Once your paper receives final approval by me in ETD, it'll be published to ProQuest's online database, where it can be accessed by members of the Stevens community and researchers around the globe 24/7, like any other academic database. And just note that your paper will only be published after the final deadline. So you don't have to worry about a rough draft being prematurely published to ProQuest before the deadline. And we'll also get into publishing embargoes later on in the presentation, which may be relevant to some of you who want to delay the publication of your paper. So as I mentioned, before you submit your paper for review, you'll carefully look over the formatting guidelines on the submission website. And then when you're ready, you'll click the ProQuest ETD link on the PDF there. And that'll bring you to the ETD website, where it'll ask you to create an account. So this is what that page will look like. And this is what the landing page looks like when you create an account. And it tells you what to expect during the submission process. It'll ask you to fill out all the necessary information for your paper, like your abstract, any supplementary files, your advisor and committee members, subject categories for your paper, Then after you fill all that out, you'll be ready to upload a PDF of your title page or an initial draft of your paper with the title page. Either is fine, since we're only just checking the formatting, not the content. So as I mentioned before, don't worry about your rough draft being prematurely published. And one of the first things that they ask when you start the submission in ETD is what kind of publishing you want. And this is how your paper will be distributed. And this part is up to you. There's a free option called traditional publishing and a paid option called open access publishing plus, which costs about $95. But it's important to note that it's entirely up to you how you want your work disseminated to the public. Just know that the paid option is not required. You also have the option of delaying the publication to ProQuest in case you were planning to publish in a peer-reviewed journal, or you have a book deal in the works, or for whatever reason. The options would be an embargo of 6 months, 1 year, and 2 years. But if this is relevant, and if you have any questions about how long your embargo should be or how to navigate that process, ask your advisor, because it'll be different depending on your situation. But I just wanted you to know that it is an option in ETD. And the final step in the initial submission is the submission and payment section here in the bottom left. You will be asked if you want to pay $55 to have ProQuest file the copyright for your paper with the US Copyright Office. But as the case with publishing, it's entirely optional. It is recommended if you're concerned with copyright infringement or protecting the intellectual property of your research, but it's not part of our submission requirements. So just know that you won't have to pay for the paid open access publishing plus, or to pay $55 to have ProQuest file the copyright, not required by us. And then it'll ask if you want to pay for any bound copies of your paper. And this part is very important. You will not pay the binding fee here. You can just click decline and move on with your submission. The binding fee is paid through the library payment portal, which I'll talk about in the next slide. So after you click decline on the order copy section, the last step is just to click submit. And once you click submit, I'll receive a notification, and then I'll check your paper to see if there are any formatting edits that need to be made. And we'll go back and forth until the formatting is approved and everything looks good. And all the emails will come from ETD, so you don't have to email me directly for this part. So the binding fee. As part of your graduation requirements, you'll pay a binding fee, which is for 3 bound copies of your paper. 2 will eventually be delivered to your department, and 1 will be preserved here in the library archives. And as I mentioned in the previous slide, there is an option to pay the binding fee in ETD, but that's just if you want a personal copy for yourself. The binding fee that we require has to be paid through the library's payment portal. And the link and instructions for that are included on the info sheet at the main submission website, library.stevens.edu/submit. Just know that sometimes your department will give you their extra copy once it's delivered to them. But since everyone seems to handle it differently, it's just worth asking if maybe you can have their extra copy. And you can pay the binding fee at any time during the process, but just make sure you keep a copy of your receipt, since you'll submit that as proof of payment at the end of the submission process. So just to quickly reiterate, when you start the submission, you have to submit the title page for approval before you defend and receive your signatures. And the reason we do this is we don't want to have you go through the process of getting your title page signed after your defense, only to find that the formatting is wrong and you have to get the signatures all over again. So submit that as early as you can, and don't worry, you can still make revisions after your defense up till the final submission deadline. At that point, you'll be locked out for making further edits. So submit the title page, get it approved, defend, incorporate your committee's edits, and resubmit a revised PDF to EDT for a final formatting check. You won't have to make a separate submission in ETD. This will all take place in the one account that you created. And these are the steps after your paper receives final approval in ETD. After you defend and resubmit your paper for final formatting check, and once it's approved, you'll get a message from ETD to submit the following to my email before I hand everything over to the registrar. So you'll submit a PDF copy of your title page with the electronic signatures of your committee. You'll submit the receipt for the binding fee payment. And don't want to sound like a broken record, but just make sure to pay the binding fee through the library's payment portal, not in ETD. And finally, and this is just for doctoral students, you have to take the Survey of Earned Doctorates, which is an annual census of PhD students in the US, which is conducted by the National Science Foundation. It just takes a few minutes to do. When you reach the end, you'll get a certificate of completion. Just save a copy of that and submit that along with everything else on this page. Once you submit all of this through email, I'll send it over to the registrar's office. And as far as you're concerned, that's it. You're done. Unless you've requested an embargo, everything will be published to ProQuest usually a few weeks after the deadline. If you do have an embargo in place, only your abstract will show up in their database, but the contents of your paper will be private until the embargo is lifted. And that's an automatic thing, so you don't need to worry about following that up. And this is just one last plug for the main submission website on the library's website, which has everything covered here in the presentation, along with the link to ETD, library payment portal, templates, and any other resources that might come in handy. So library.stevens.edu/submit. And here are some links and resources I mentioned earlier that might help with any questions related to your defense, graduating, research, and writing help. And I would definitely make use of the librarians here, since navigating our databases through the library catalog can be a pretty arcane or cumbersome process at times. So during the day, there's always a librarian on hand who can help you with the research process. You can just go to the library's website and speak to a live librarian through chat, or just show up to the library and you can speak with someone who's sitting at the research desk. If you need help writing your paper, you can make an appointment with the Writing and Communications Center at wcc@stevens.edu. So that's it as far as this presentation goes. If you need any additional help, or if you have any other questions about the formatting and submission process, feel free to contact me at my email here, thoughta@stevens.edu. So good luck with your writing and your research, and I'll see you all soon.